For as long as we've known them, both Wanda and Vision have strived for the life they've never known. They're the outsiders who are thrust into the world of the Avengers out of a moral obligation to save humanity. Yet, they've never quite felt like they belong, which is perhaps why they naturally gravitated towards each other. Yet, optimistically cling to the hope that there is a shot at a normal life on the other side, especially Wanda. Her parents were murdered by Stark technology. Her and Pietro were weaponized by Baron von Strucker. She tragically lost her brother in the fight against Ultron. She accidentally blew up a building in Lagos, killing several Wakandan humanitarian workers. Treated as a weapon of mass destruction by the government, was forced to kill the love of her life in order to save the world, only to have it amount to nothing. Snapped away into oblivion, returns, helps save humanity once again, and is rewarded with nothing. Everyone else gets to return home to some sense of normalcy, with friends, family, and loved ones, but not her. Vision is gone. She made the ultimate sacrifice and is now forced to pick up the pieces. And while the death of Vision is a heartbreaking loss for her, it signifies far more. It's the final nail in the coffin for Wanda's own sanity. If the world refuses to allow her to lead a normal life and continues to mercilessly take everything away from her, she'll construct a reality of her own. A sheltered utopia built on suppressed fears and the inability to address real problems. American Suburbia.
And what could be more American than a sponsorship? And if you're going to want to construct your own reality, you're going to want today's sponsor, which is ExpressVPN. Don't be constructing your realities without protection, folks. Whenever you're connected to an unencrypted internet connection on your laptop or mobile devices, other people can get access to your internet traffic. But when you use a VPN like ExpressVPN, it securely tethers you and your device to the internet. This prevents hackers and even Wanda Maximoff from peering into your very soul to obtain your passwords or personal information, along with your internet service provider from selling your data. It also just happens to allow you to access the content you love anywhere in the world without restrictions. So if you want to hop on the UK or Canadian Netflix and watch any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever they have over there, SpongeBob, Modern Family, whatever, you can do that. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET, Forbes, TechRadar, the New York Times, BBC, and more. Trust me, guys, if you are constructing a reality of your own to escape the problems of the world, you're going to want to do it with protection, and that's where ExpressVPN comes in. Find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description down below or visiting expressvpn.com/filmspeak. And now with that out of the way, let's talk about grief and trauma.
Oh, this is gonna be a gas!
WandaVision is more than just a wacky sitcom set inside the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yes, it's fun, endearing, innovative, and entertaining, but its true brilliance lies in how it addresses and calls into question the lengths we will go to continue feeding ourselves a beautiful lie in order to avoid addressing the real problems that plague us. WandaVision uses the framework of classic sitcoms to parallel the idealized view of the American suburb with Wanda's desire for a normal life and inability to address her grief, trauma, and pain. The notion of idealizing the past to escape the trauma of today is truthfully a hallmark of much of today's media. The 80s are romanticized, many action films harken back to the style of the 90s. I mean, even outside of media, some extremist groups weaponize this false ideology that things were better back then, and we must do everything in our power to revert. Wanda, and really so many of us, feed ourselves this fantasy in an effort to mask our pain in comfort, instead of addressing it head-on against our better judgment.
Now we can finally watch Green Acres the way it was meant to be seen. So, which one is mine?
Whichever one you want, man. Not that one.
Sitcoms are a staple of American television. They've always provided an overdramatic look at the world around us, and while filled with relatable situations, characters, and relationships, there's very clearly a facade that idealizes the events and the setting. This aspirational view is pure comfort, not only for the characters that inhabit the scene, but in the structure and audience's relationships with them as well. There's the classic setup, comedic misunderstanding, and resolution. The stories are circular and inconsequential. Our characters are never in any real danger, and we know this. It's part of the appeal. We know that these conflicts will get resolved in 20 to 30 minutes. Why do you think out of all of television, sitcoms have the most replay value? It's familiar, comforting, and provides a nostalgic distraction. Many of us even aspire to be like some of the characters in these shows, hence why the "What Office character are you?" or "What Friends character are you?" BuzzFeed quizzes are so popular. Family sitcoms specifically epitomize a certain view of domestication that's safe, sheltered, fun, and carefree, mostly because they take place in the suburbs. And that's an idea that would be quite enticing to someone like Wanda, who's been tirelessly searching for normalcy. The fact of the matter is that sitcoms, especially those of the 50s and 60s, provided a sanitized interpretation of the world that's relatively far removed from reality. And while it may provide Wanda with a momentary measure of comfort, the fantasy can't last forever. Suppressing the pain of reality in favor of living a lie doesn't solve anything. It only prolongs the inevitable confrontation. These issues still loom large and slowly but surely begin to weigh heavily on Wanda's mind, increasing in mass and severity. Her past traumas subconsciously seep into the fantasy she's constructed, constricting her until they inevitably consume her. While she believes that she can simply hide in a different decade, rewind an imperfect moment, intrusion from the outside world, glitch in the matrix, the fantasy will begin to collapse in on itself, creating a far deadlier mess. It's interesting that Wanda should long to return to the golden age of television to construct her reality, as historically, women were far more repressed than they are today. However, the 50s and 60s are far removed from the present day, which houses Wanda's pain and trauma, making for an enticing era to revisit. The ideas of using the past to hide from the present is a very human thing. It's true that the 1960s might be long before Wanda's time, but fundamentally, it's no different than reminiscing on a positive thought from one's childhood in order to not think about something bad happening in our present. So if Wanda is reminiscing on a period of time that she never lived through and was historically archaic for women, what did she base her fantasy on? The media of the time period. So much of television, films, advertisements, newspapers, and really media in general during the 1950s and 60s perpetuated this idea of the picture-perfect American family, the nuclear family, the secluded suburbs and isolated community, detached from real-world issues where your problems are minute and life is easy and carefree. However, for as wondrous as suburbia was made out to be, in reality, it was rather close-minded, uniform, unaccepted, and elitist. Much like how Wanda masks her problems in a false reality, the problems of the time period were masked by this romanticized idea of utopia put forth by the media. And so Wanda isn't even basing her fantasy in what the time period was actually like, which is what so many of us do when we reflect on the past through rose-tinted glasses. She only sees the reality constructed through shows like I Love Lucy, Bewitched, The Dick Van Dyke Show, where things were perceived to be simpler, sweeter, more innocent, without a hint of cynicism. That's why WandaVision begins in the golden age of sitcoms. It's not only the furthest removed from present day, but presents a desirable look at an age that wasn't as glamorous as those shows made it out to be. However, WandaVision isn't entirely set in the era of 50s, 60s sitcoms.
Well, I think the children might need some popcorn.
Wanda.
What?
In an interview with Collider, Elizabeth Olsen referred to herself as this mama bear desperately trying to cling to the fantasy she's always wanted and dreamed of. The problem is, when the larger MCU comes knocking at her door, she feels backed into a corner, and that tension and friction is what forces her hand to disguise her current reality through the lens of a different sitcom in a different decade. As WandaVision progresses through time and these disturbances continue, we not only shift closer aesthetically to the palette of the MCU, but move closer in time to Wanda's trauma. It makes sense that she would cling to an alternate reality where she has not only Vision, but 2 kids and her brother, but literally only has to use these powers for convenience and faces no serious threats from day to day. Even in her fantasy, she lives with this fear of being discovered, of not being accepted into the community of Westview. She's afraid. She knows deep down the fantasy can't last forever, that she's a living lie, and even imparts some wisdom onto her sons, Billy and Tommy, to confront the grief head on instead of hiding behind their abilities. The irony is that she's unable to do that herself. She continues to aggressively ward off every disruption in a desperate attempt to preserve her world, but sadly,
life, finds a way.
As her reality begins to collide with that of today, the facade begins to fade and the fantasy collapses. Wanda and Vision have always been two characters within the ethos of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that seem to be overshadowed by their much more popular and developed peers. Despite both of their intriguing origins and their relationship to the overall narrative of the story, much of what we know about them is based on brief explanations of backstory and implied events that shape the narrative of who they are. But the actual nuance that underpins their relationship and their impact in the overall universe has yet to be realistically developed in a relatable and accessible manner until now with WandaVision. Built into the implicit understanding of the show is the knowledge that Wanda is effectively trapped within her own mind. As with any mind, it's populated with memories of the past, the traumas, the wishes, the dreams, and the lies that will shape someone's perspective of the world. Wanda's perspective of the world has been shaped by nothing but misfortune since her childhood, growing up in a war-torn country, having everything stripped from her and exploited as a weapon for a military she didn't understand. Her only perception of an ideal world came from the sitcoms she's watched. A world where suburban families are tight, everyone is safe, problems are largely superficial, and you start and end the day with cheery music and a happily ever after. For her, it's a form of therapy, of reaching back to a time where life was good. She had a healthy, loving family free of the monstrous world around her. Wanda bridges herself back to her diamond absolute of childhood innocence through the lens of the sitcoms that shaped her, and as they progress through the time, she grows with them. It's absolute perfection, and it's this exact perfection that Wanda so desperately wanted to achieve in her reality. But as hard as she may try, her true identity infiltrates every aspect of Wanda's reality. Her trauma has embedded itself so deep in her mind that despite covering it up with her ideal world, a stable marriage and family, a pleasant neighborhood, a constant companion, a community to participate in, the cracks of her past still seep through. Offhand lines of dialogue that directly correlate with horrific events from the past.
He was killed by Ultron, wasn't he?
My wife and her flying saucers.
My husband and his indestructible head.
Wanda's powers are inherently cerebral. They take root in the mind and express themselves within the world. When trauma occurs, we bury those thoughts deep within the recesses of our minds. Every subsequent experience that we have builds around those moments in our mind until our mind has constructed a world that we become stuck in, a facade forged by trauma, reinforced through the reactive memories, and held together by one beautiful lie. Who's to blame her though? She's the one who has had everything taken from her and asked for nothing except for a final goodbye to the one person in her life who understood her, even if in a unique way. For Wanda, Vision was the key to helping Wanda recontextualize her grief as love. When she arrives in Westview with the plans for her and Vision's forever home, that grief comes to a full climax, the remnants of her entire world in a lab, and the foundation of her forever unbuilt. When she finally releases everything and transforms Westview, it is the tragic, expressive reality encapsulated in Vision's words to her.
But what is grief? If not love, persevering.
Wanda loved Vision so much, and he became so much a part of her that she was willing to bring him back as an integral part of her internal psyche, corporeally acting within Westview. The lie is the sitcom reality is tragic, but it's a lie that Wanda is willing to live, because living in her world forged by the embodied grief and loss that plagues her is better than surrendering her hope and memory to the cold grip of reality. And maybe, just maybe because of this, she will be able to reconstruct the very fiber of reality itself.
I am something else. I'm still me, I think, but that's not what everyone else sees.
You're saying they'll come for me.
We would protect you.
Wanda was practically bred as a weapon, not being given the opportunity to experience the world as a person until her early adulthood. She was stripped of her very identity as a human, her agency, and thus, throughout the show, acts to not only reclaim her voice, but to live her life as herself, no matter the cost or to the detriment of thousands of innocent civilians and even her deceased husband. While we immediately empathize and wish for Wanda's happiness given her history in the MCU, we're also conflicted. In many ways, she can be seen as the antagonist of this story. How far are we willing to let Wanda indulge her dangerous coping mechanisms before we stop giving her a free pass? This unchecked selfishness and fractured emotional state, coupled with her immense power, makes her a very real threat that, if pushed to a breaking point, could push her vision onto the world, altering the very fabric of human DNA. This vulnerable state also makes her very susceptible to enabling and persuasion. With the reveal of Catherine Hahn's Agatha Harkness continuing to feed Wanda's grief, Wanda becomes an even more sympathetic and relatable figure. Agatha, knowing full well the fragile state the world's most powerful metahuman is in, enables Wanda to indulge her destructive coping mechanisms for her benefit in order to attain a power she is yet to master. At her lowest moment, Wanda is again used to further the agendas of others, manipulated using her emotional wants and needs, and denied a safety net that could healthily bring her face to face with her trauma. But instead, Agatha inflicts more pain by threatening the safety of her children in order to steal her abilities if she doesn't forcibly and literally confront her past. The support system Wanda believed to be her newfound friends and family is nothing more than a ruse, and those who truly wish to help her, such as Vision, Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy, know that to turn a new leaf, she must accept the truth. She may be an antagonist to the outside world, but she's truthfully as much a victim as the people of Westview. It's easy to judge her from the outside looking in, but walk a mile in her shoes and you'll understand exactly why she's resorted to doing what she's doing. As for Vision, he was created first by being destroyed by Ultron and then being reborn practically against his will. However, Vision was never just another AI. The melding of his creators mixed with the power of the Soul Stone gave him sentience that took on a life of its own. Since his creation, Vision continued to adopt more and more human traits, emotions, and free will. He became arguably more human than some of the other members of the Avengers. He believed in the empathy and goodwill of mankind and preserved their best interests even in the darkest of times.
It's a privilege to be among them.
Arguably, the greatest advancement in his sentience and the proof of his humanity was his unconditional love and adoration for Wanda. If he was truly just another typical android, then love and compassion couldn't be possible. The tragedy of his death is that he made the selfless decision to sacrifice himself for the preservation of mankind, and though his sacrifice didn't prevent Thanos from wiping out half of the universe, initially, it was still his decision. Given the fact that he's synthetic, Vision could have easily been resurrected. However, that's not what he wanted. His final wish in the event of his death was for him to remain dead as any normal human would. In his mind, and in the mind of those closest to him, Vision was as human as the rest of them, and if his final request was to remain dead, that request was to be respected. However, in WandaVision, we learned that Sword had other plans for his body, seeking to weaponize him as another Ultron-like figure. Wanda also had other plans. The one person who saw Vision for who he was and respected the very soul he came to have only wanted to honor his final wish with a proper burial. However, Tyler Hayward and the rest of his Sword division not only ignored Wanda's wish, but Vision's final wish as well, stripping him of autonomy and resurrecting him out of their own selfish militaristic ambitions, and again, preying on Wanda's fragile state to advance their agenda. Since Vision was a part of her, Wanda believes she can bring him back in her own reality, since the life and memories they shared live with her. While the Vision she brings back feels and acts like the Vision she knew for the past decade, he's devoid of all the memories, life experiences, thoughts, and beliefs that made Vision, Vision. This false Vision, while an understandable reaction to the tragedy she's endured, only further serves to explore the problematic nature of suppressing grief with fantasy. Wanda manifested her vision out of love as a coping mechanism, and while her intentions are good, they're misplaced, as it still went against Vision's last will. It's definitely a gentler form of stripping a dead man's autonomy, in contrast to Hayward's ruthless methods, but by giving life to a new Vision, Wanda is essentially forcing Vision into the same place she's lived in her whole life, lacking all agency. The show personifies Vision's puppeteered new life by placing him in a similar position, working at a company with no apparent purpose, living life in an aimless direction save for his love for Wanda.
Would you be so good as to tell me what it is we do here exactly?
While separately autonomous, he's become somewhat of a shell, manipulated by Wanda with the sole purpose of being her husband, devoid of free will. Or so she thinks. Wanda thinks she can just erase the past and start anew with the Vision she loved. However, erasing the past means erasing the experiences that brought the two of them together, and erasing the very events that shaped Vision into who he was, which is why, while undoubtedly madly in love, the two never seem to be on the same wavelength or progress beyond a superficial sitcom romance. He's Vision, but not the Vision she knew, and while he exists in Wanda's reality, he's not an extension of her subconscious. Just as before, he continues to grow sentience, only this new Vision feels as though he's living someone else's life, like he's living a lie.
I had no idea how much Wanda had endured before coming to Westview. How much we both had, I guess. Oh, I can't remember it. For me, it feels like it happened to someone else, you know, but for her...
This becomes a heady conflict for Vision as he grapples with his own existence, of loving Wanda and empathizing with the extensive trauma she's endured, but also being the current version of Vision he is, and doing the right moral thing to save innocent lives, including Wanda. As Wanda constructs her destructive reality based on a lie, she strives for the individuality she believes was taken from her, while stripping Vision of their painful shared memories in order to service her fantasy. The truth is, the opposite is true. As Wanda indulges her fantasies, she loses her tether to humanity. The more Vision is suppressed by the reality of the Hex, the more he begins to question its very nature, and the more he begins to gravitate towards free will.
What am I doing here? Sitting, talking to you? When this is absurd.
Ultimately, Wanda's experiment fails, and the two find themselves at the exact same place they were originally at. It's only by confronting their traumatic past together that they're able to successfully grow and conquer the nightmares that haunt them. WandaVision speaks to those of us who feel like outsiders and desperately want to conform to societal constructs in order to feel like we belong. It represents the idealization that all of us experience. No matter where we are in life or how much has gone right or wrong for us, none of us have everything. We can't simply alter our surroundings or rewind a bad take until we produce the perfect moment. Which is ironic because on a sitcom set, oftentimes those bad takes result in happy accidents that further enhance the scene. Even Wanda, in this so-called picture-perfect reality she's constructed, can't ward off the imperfections of her own life forever. We can't forge the perfect life because no such thing exists. It's subjective and doesn't confine to any quantifiable standard. Media may feed us one thing, but is that symmetric suburban life really all it's chalked up to be? Of course not, which is why the facade of the suburb has already crumbled in a postmodern world. Wanda's had a harsh life, and by her standard, it's far from perfect. But those imperfections shaped her into the person she is. They gave her remarkable abilities, a new family to call her own, and the love of her life. For as horrific, terrifying, and traumatic as the world can be, it's also the place that allowed Wanda to grow as a person. In her fantasy, she can do all the things she never could and be the perfect suburban housewife, but none of that can make up for the fact that she's living a lie. And no matter how appealing it may be, she's not living the life of the real Wanda Maximoff. For reality, true reality, is the only place that's real. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. It means the world to me. I've been working on this thing since the beginning of January when I screened the first 3 episodes, and I've been tweaking it basically week after week. And I also got to give a big thanks to my buddy Zach from the Thought Theater, who helped out with the scripting process, ideation process. He was a great, board to sort of bounce things off of, and also he lent his voice to some of the narration that you heard during this. So it was a nice little collab between the two of us, and hopefully we can do more, collab video essays like this this in the future. But be sure to jump down in the comment section and let me know what you're thinking about WandaVision. Do you think it's one of the best things that Marvel has created this far? Because I certainly do. I guess the finale is this week, so what do you think is going to happen in the finale? This is going to age poorly. Maybe don't put that in there. Let's have a great conversation down there. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to give this video a like, share it with your friends, your Marvel-loving friends, your MCU, WandaVision-loving friends, and be sure to subscribe to the FilmSpeak channel so you don't miss out on more movie reviews, video essays, television coverage, interviews, all that good stuff. We like to say the conversation continues after the credits, and of course, we'd love to have you be part of that conversation, so consider subscribing to the channel. Next week, next Wednesday, is the big day. I'm going to release my DCEU deep dive talking about BVS, Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, all the stuff in the Snyderverse and how a musical motif links them all together. So you're definitely going to want to stay tuned for that special video essay. But until then, guys, you can follow me on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, thank you so much again for checking out this video, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.